This is a podcast about new crops. You're going to love it. Join us on The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin.
We always tell people start small, make sure you can love the plant and deal with it and get your feel on the harvest and the hand aspects of it before you go big.
Welcome, everybody, to The Cutting Edge, our podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin. I am Jason Fischbach, the agriculture agent in Ashland, Bayfield counties, and joined today by Carl Dooley. Carl?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I'm looking forward to this program on elderberries. My experience on elderberries is eating elderberry jelly that my mother used to make and sneaking a little elderberry wine that she had now and then. But that's the extent. So I'm ready to learn today.
I used to grow up by our farm here in Ashland and didn't have any success. I think the soils are too heavy maybe. But I remember as a kid, it was all over in our woods outside Shorewood, Minnesota, down in the Twin Cities. And we used to take the stems. I think this was elderberry. Take the stems and they're hollow.
Yes.
And you could make flutes and all kinds of cool stuff out of them. But that's really the extent of my experience with it. But luckily, we have some pros here to join us today to talk about elderberry. Not only the plant and the production, but also the efforts that are underway in the Midwest to develop an industry around elderberry and elderberry flowers, it sounds like too. So let's just jump right into it. Chris Patton with the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative. Chris, welcome. And you want to introduce yourself and how you're involved with elderberries?
Jason. Yes, I'm Chris Patton. If you've gone to the Moses Conference and come by the elderberry booth, River Hills Harvest with Terry Durham, you've probably met me. I've been there since 2011, and that's where I first learned about elderberry when Terry Durham, who's based south of Columbia, Missouri, was presenting on that. And he's been there longer than I have, and he is a multi-decade farmer by experience. And around 2000, he started looking at the elderberries growing wild around the edges of his farm, and he says, well, what happens if I put them in the field? And that coincided with interest from the University of Missouri to do some research and explore that for many of the same reasons both of you hosting here mentioned, and finding alternative crops, perennial crops. And now elderberry is the number one fruit crop of Missouri in sales volume and dollar value.
Number one over small fruits, strawberries, all that stuff?
Yep. They have probably about 400 producing acres at least there in Missouri. Maybe 500 because we are adding acres every year. And I, besides leading the co-op, which I started in September of 2012, I market the River Hills Harvest brand of elderberry products nationally outside of Missouri. And so you'll find them there. I've been in the co-ops there, the food co-ops in Wisconsin for a long time. Other stores, independents like Metcalfe's or Fresh Time. And so, and we're in about 500 retail stores across the country. Hy-Vee carries them too in a lot of their stores. So I originally looked at elderberries from the standpoint of growing them, but soon realized that I was 62 at the time, that I'd be better off working with developing the industry and partnering. And I did farm for 6 years with Natasha, Simeon, who will come on here a little bit later, and Paul Otten was my mentor. With, again, a man with decades of experience in working with berries and currants and all kinds of things, and I owe a lot to him. And without him, I might not have started the co-op, but he introduced me to cooperative development services. So we've done a number of feasibility studies and had a number of grants. Primarily in Minnesota. We did get some recently in Wisconsin for developing and growing, and we're very excited about that. And we also work closely with the Savannah Institute, and we just finished a series of 3 discussions between Terry and I that you can find on the Savannah Institute website if you want more information after this podcast.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And Natasha, can you tell us about yourself and how you're involved with elderberries?
Yeah. Hey, I'm Natasha Simeon, and I farm at Regeneration Acres. I got involved with elderberries. I was volunteering at Natura Farms, which was managed by the late Paul Otten. And while I really enjoyed vegetable production and digging potatoes and carrots out of the ground, there's always been something really appealing to me about perennial crops, because you have the plant and you have a relationship with the plant, and it's something permanent, not so transient. And I always hated at the end of the season having to like pull up tomatoes. Like it feels like you've got this healthy plant you've been nurturing, and at the end of the season you either pull it up or it dies from the frost. And perennials don't do that. They stick around and you have a relationship. And one of my favorite things about perennials is that if you have, like with COVID, life kind of got busy with my off-farm job, and I kind of have ignored my field, but they're still there. So that's something I find really, really, really appealing about perennials and elderberries, because they are an improved variety of a native crop. You don't have to sit and baby them, and I appreciate that in my life. So I worked with Paul, and I learned about soils, and I learned about perennial crops, and I learned about human health and elderberries. And now my primary focus is propagation for nursery stock. But I also, it's amazing because of the work Chris has done. It's amazing how people went from asking me, what are elderberries, to they hear the word elderberries and their eyes just perk up and their ears perk up, and they're like, I want some, get me some, make sure you reserve some for me. So it's just kind of amazing what's happened in the industry in the last couple of years, or a few years.
So tell us about elderberries, the plant, how they grow. Are they trees? Are they shrubs? Talk about sort of from the beginning of planting on up to harvest, how you manage these things, what to look for. So I don't know, Natasha, you want to start?
Sure. So as I mentioned, elderberries are native, so they don't really need special babying and pampering. They really appreciate having good soil. A lot of people have the notion that they like to have their feet wet. And the reality is they can grow near water, but they don't like to actually be in water. That's not their natural habitat. If you see elderberries, you'll see them on creek beds and on roadsides, but they're not down in the bottom, they're on the side. So when people call and ask me what's the best place to grow elderberries, I tell them full sun is best because you get the best berry production like any other berry. But they can handle part shade. You're just not going to get as good of a crop or volume wise. And they love the ideal soil that every plant loves, but they can tolerate other soils as well. They don't like it too sandy. They don't like it too clay. When you get them, you can start them with cuttings, where it's just a dormant hardwood cutting that has, they're called the nodes. And so the bottom node becomes the roots, the top node becomes the leaves and stems. You can also start them as started plants. The most important thing when you're planting elderberries is that first season and the first couple seasons, make sure they're watered and make sure that they're kept weed free, and that lets them get their feet under them. And once they have their feet under them, they will reward you for years and years and years to come. And in fact, if you do nothing, once they're established, you will end up with an elderberry forest. Like they will literally outcompete everything. You won't have alleys. You'll just have this huge elderberry forest. So
Natasha, the cuttings are, though I'm familiar somewhat with like willow cuttings or dogwood. How long should they be? What's sort of the minimum, maximum diameter? Do they need to be, vegetative New Year sprouts, or can they be from second year wood, or what kind of cuttings work?
So the elderberries in our climate in the upper Midwest, the best thing, once they're established after the second season, the best thing to do is actually cut them down to the ground, because you get the most fruit on that first year's growth. And so if you want to vegetatively propagate them, the thing to do is they're going to go dormant in the fall, and then in late winter, basically I do it when I can get out in the field without the snow going into my, I wear my snow boots so high and I don't want the snow going into me and getting me wet. So while they're dormant, you go out and take the cuttings. The best size is about pencil size. Too small and they don't do as well. Too big and you're just putting too much energy into cutting the stems. And so about the width of a pencil, and you want it to have at least 2 nodes. And so you have the bottom node is the one that differentiates into roots, and the top nodes differentiates into leaves and stems. You can actually propagate them sideways, where instead of growing them up and down in the media, you turn them sideways. And so some people have done that, where you just have they take the whole stem and lay it sideways, and then every single node differentiates into an individual plant. The challenge with that is if you're doing it in the ground, just make sure you keep up on the weeds so that the weeds don't overtake it. And once, like I said, once they're like, you give them water, or make sure they have water, make sure they're kept weeded, and they get planted. We put the rows in between rows, I would say at least 10 feet more if you've got the space, because once your plants become established, it kind of feels like a jungle. And when you're out harvesting and the plants are full size, it's really hard. Like at Natura, the plants were planted, I think they were 9 feet on center, and you feel like you're in the middle of a Amazon jungle trying to harvest.
So how tall will they get when they're at maturity?
Different cultivars get different heights. The shorter ones get about 7-8 feet, and the taller ones get about 12 feet.
Oh, okay.
So there's kind of a variety there, but that's kind of the range that they get.
All right.
You said the importance that first year of maintaining weed free. Are you doing that through mulching mainly, or?
Yeah.
The best way is mulching and mowing, and just keeping the weeds down so that they're getting the roots under them. And they're multi-stem, so each plant doesn't just have one. I mean, there's a primocane, a main thing, but once they get established, each plant will end up having, I don't know, like 8 to 10, 15 stems on the plant.
Some of your folks might think, well, I can just go grab out of the wild, because they are all over the place. You know, we've always encouraged people to do that because they're terribly understudied. I've got 4 different wild ones in my yard that I secured from along Minnehaha Creek in Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. And they're all a little different. And I talk about them in some of the presentations that you can find on the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative website. And actually that website now is 3 websites. There's so much material there. They're all linked together, but one focuses on growing, another on the health benefit research, and then the other is primarily targeted to the many people that come looking to buy elderberry ingredients, but it has summaries on the health and grow. So the problem with most of the wild ones do not bear fruit on the first year cane. And so this makes them much more labor intensive and difficult for management. And it could work in some of the northern areas where the seasons are shorter if someone's focused on flower production as opposed to berries, because generally the wild ones that I have in my yard also do not ripen as evenly as the cultivars that were tested at the University of Missouri. And that's a big thing. And that's probably an area at some point where we get, I know Don Wise, the University of Minnesota, wants to, find the genes so that we can ripen those things evenly, which would make a huge difference. And then the berries do differ in size, ingredient composition, sweetness, acidity, all of that. And we really don't know. We don't know how much of that is the variation in the genetics, how much of it is soil related. And so these are all factors involved. And as far as what Natasha was saying, you've got to mow because they spread like raspberries. And so, we usually have a mixture of legumes and native grasses in between the aisles, and you want to keep them mowed or they do take over, they spread. Mm-hmm. And we've grown more to favor those cultivars that tend to be more upright as well for that reason, because some of them tend to be a little bit more wavy, dancy, bowing, and that gets in the way of mowing a lot more quickly, and then they get entangled. And we also get into the issues of pest control that way too. But, and some
Chris,
growers do use matting and plastic to control the weeds the first year. But you have to have something that's going to decompose, or you're going to have to pull it off because of the way the plant spreads.
Got it. So on the cultivar side, are there particular cultivars that are kind of rising to the top that most growers grow? Is the market favoring a particular cultivar over another?
Well, the 3 most favored cultivars right now are Ranch, Bob Gordon, and Adams. And elderberries, like tomatoes, are determinate and indeterminate. And the determinate meaning they bloom and berry once, indeterminate they keep blooming. So Adams is an indeterminate, Ranch and Bob Gordon are determinants. And people like growing Ranch and Bob Gordon because ranch is usually a couple weeks earlier, so it splits a little bit on the on the labor, and when it comes harvest time, and that's really important. I've talked to a number of folks growing corn and soybeans about growing elderberry as a crop, for instance. And one of the things they've got to understand is that there is still a huge amount of hand labor involved in this, and the technology is not there on elderberry yet. It's all in development. We do have mechanical assistance on destemming the berries, because your buyers are going to want those berries pretty much all ripe, and not the green and unripe ones, and without much, if any, stems. And so that's Terry developed a destemmer that works so we could commercialize the berry production and produce a retail brand. We have some other growers that are working on different destemmer models, and with their different ideas, but we don't have a large volume destemmer available yet. I just got a USDA grant for VAPG planning grant, and that Cooperative Development Services is managing, and we've got participation with folks in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And we'll be looking at the development of production hubs, and part of that is the improved technology on the crop handling from harvest to actually frozen bulk storage.
Got it. So those favored cultivars right now, how far north are they being grown?
Well, they'll grow all the way into Canada. The key is will you get a crop?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and this is where if you don't cut them all the way down, you're going to get flowers and berries a couple weeks earlier than if you do, even on those same cultivars. But you're not going to have the same evenness of ripening, and that's a factor, because whenever you prune a bush, even within that bush, your cymes or your bunch of berries aren't going to harvest or ripen at the same time. And and the ones in my yard, I'll go and I'll pick a third, 40% of the cymes, and then I'll go back, pick the other half, and then the other half. And that's just even on the cyme, not even considering the aspects of the berry ripening evenness within the cyme.
Got it. So let me circle back here to Natasha, back to the kind of production sequence. So they put cuttings in the ground, or rooted plants perhaps, keep the weeds down the first year. And then it's cut back in the fall or early spring, I take it? And then...
Yeah, actually the first 2 seasons, you don't want to cut them back.
Okay, so 2 years, you just let them go.
Yep, you let them go. And I tell people, I don't know if everybody does it, but I tell people, if you really want to, if you're playing long game, those first 2 years, you pick off those flowers as soon as they start developing, because you want that plant putting all of its energy into root production. And so for those first 2 seasons, and it's pretty simple, when the flowers first form, you can just take your fingers and roll them, and just kind of roll them right off. But so it's a little tedious, but if you do it, you're rewarded by better roots. And elderberries have amazing root systems. Once they have their roots under them, you are never moving that plant. Like, they are long, ropey roots that I tell people, if you ever get an elderberry field and change your mind, your elderberry field will haunt you, because those roots that you leave in the ground will come up, and unless you're mowing them, you will have an elderberry field again.
Got it. Okay, so it's gone 2 years now. My first production year. What should I be doing?
Waiting for them to ripen, and being really nice to all your friends and neighbors, so that when they ripen, you have a whole gaggle of people to help you. Because as Chris mentioned, it is not mechanized. You're out there. We use apple picking bags and little scissors, and I try and gather as many people as possible, or bribe my kids to go in the field, and you go through the field and you cut off the berries and put them into bins. And so it's not only you hand harvesting, that the challenge is you have got to get those plants, or those berries, processed. You have to destem them, clean them, rinse them, and while you're cleaning, you're actually sorting out the unripe berries, the slugs, the spiders, all the other things. When you put them in the water, the ripe berries sink, basically everything else floats, and so you have to skim it, and then you rinse it and strain it, and you want to package it and get it in the freezer. And you want to do that pretty quick, because as soon as those berries aren't on that plant, they're losing. Like, you need to get them on frozen as quick as you can.
Okay.
To preserve integrity.
A firm berry like an aronia, or they go splat like a raspberry?
When they're ripe, they're kind of like, they don't get as soft as a raspberry, but when they're ripe, they have a firm skin, but you can't be too rough on them because they can squish. The biggest challenge, and maybe I'm segueing to something else we're not going to yet, but with spotted wing Drosophila, that's really been challenging because usually when they're ripe, there's a firmness to them that you're okay. But when they have spotted wing Drosophila, even when you go to pick them, the fruit is already like shriveled, like they've already sucked the juice out, and your hands get totally purple because the spotted wing Drosophila have been feasting on your fruit before you get there.
So the skin isn't real tough then, like the aronia and some others that.
No.
The spotted wing really doesn't affect. What are the size of these berries? I know they vary. What's kind of an average size? I haven't seen them since I was a little kid. So.
That's hard, Chris. What's something that's
Well,
the right size?
I say I can put 6 of them on my fingernail.
There, that's good.
Okay. So they're pretty small.
They are. And like Natasha said, they are, when they're properly ripe, they're dusky dark. They aren't shiny dark. And they're all a little different in how black versus how red they are when they're ripe. Usually, I would wait till I started to see some falling off. And then the Asian fruit fly, the spotted wing Drosophila, is the biggest problem. Japanese beetle can also be a problem. We've got a new grower. This is his 3rd year. He's in western Wisconsin. He was planning on having a few hundred pounds, and he said the deer ate it. And, so, depending on where you are, deer fencing is an issue. Sometimes birds. At Natura Farm, where Natasha and I worked together with Paul, we didn't have those issues so much. I mean, you had some birds around the edges, but most of the crop was good. And it's like any kind of berry crop. If you've got some bird droppings, or if you've got a sign that's been infested with a Drosophila, you don't pick those. You get rid of them.
So, Chris, you said the 4-letter word in the world of perennial woody crops, deer. And in hazelnuts, it's interesting because we kind of, sometimes we like to lessen the impact of deer, maybe because we're trying to promote the crop. But let's just get right down to brass tacks. How big of a problem are deer, right? Will they chew these things to the ground and wipe you out in the 1st or 2nd year if you don't do something, or is it really they're nibbling and it does actually depend on deer density?
It really depends on your deer pressure. Elderberry is not their favorite food, not like a raspberry or an apple.
Okay.
And so for most of our growers, and this is, I've got members from coast to coast now. And the stories I get is that, the deer will nibble around the edges, they'll eat a little bit here and there. But you get some areas where the deer pressure is high and it's a big problem. Mm-hmm. And the same with birds. If you're along a flyway of a species of bird that identifies with feasting on those berries, you're going to need bird netting. We've got a farmer in Winona, and he has to have the whole thing netted and the whole thing fenced against the deer and netted against the birds. So it varies. A lot of folks down in Missouri, they get a permit where they can hunt deer out of season. And so as the berries are getting ripe, they go out, or they find friends to go out and hunt around the area. And the deer aren't stupid. They get away from your fields. But most places need some kind of fencing, and there's a lot of different approaches to that, from filament and electric wire to the full-fledged deer fencing. And I know Minnesota has a deer fence program. Not sure about Wisconsin, but that is something that is very determined by the area. It's just like your soil.
So you've harvested. Now what? Do you let it grow the rest of the year and then cut it in the winter to the ground, or are you doing some pruning post-harvest, or how does that work?
It depends. I would encourage most people, and if they're not looking to do vegetative production, if they're not looking to take their own cuttings, the best time to prune them to the ground is once they've gone dormant in the late fall. Just because there are things like cane borer and pests that can and mites that can stay over winter. And so to reduce the number of those, the best thing to do is to do it in late fall. Once you know the plant's dormant, just go through and cut it to the ground. people have done different experiments with, do you cut it 16 feet tall or 16 inches tall, 12 inches tall? But really overall, except for one cultivar Johns that really not a lot of people are growing because of its challenges, the extra labor, the best thing to do is basically get them within a couple, like three inches of the ground and cut them down, and just remove those canes and then just let them sleep through the winter. And then come spring, they'll come up and do their thing.
Got it.
So winter hardiness, you don't have to mulch them or anything in the far north?
No,
Well,
I mean,
they're native. They're native. They're not going to give you a problem. And like Natasha said, if you don't cut it closer to the ground like that, the canes that come up are not as strong. They're more prone to wind damage. So you want like 4 inches or lower from the ground.
You said there's 400 acres in Missouri, and I'm thinking a couple of things. One, 400 acres of hand harvested fruit. Boy, with that model, what's the ceiling? And then also from any new crop, what do you think is the ceiling for elderberry? In terms of acreage
so when I started this, and there's presentations on that going back, the market for elderberry, if 1% of our population would use some elderberry more than once a year, we need 22,500 acres of cultivated elderberry, and we probably only have a little over 1,000 acres right now. I can tell you right now that demand far exceeds supply, especially with COVID. We sold out of all available elderberry, but whether it be bulk frozen or the River Hills Harvest products, or most of our growers and members make their own products. Everyone was sold out by March, if not the first week in April. And so right now, I mean, even when I go to my national distributor, Cahey, they said, you do not need to advertise this year. We won't require that as part of your marketing, because if you can just get product in the stores, it'll be gone. And no, you don't need to do a sale of 15%, only go 10%. And I'm only doing one sale instead. They normally want you to do 4 sales a year, but this is the market for elderberry. It is insatiable at this point. I am trying to juggle orders and production availability, and it's a big challenge.
So what are the main products at elderberry? Somebody mentioned harvesting both flowers, but then of course the berries.
Yes, and just on the flowers, we do suggest that people harvest flowers and sell them up to 3 or 4 feet above the ground, because those berries generally don't set as well anyway, and it will put more of the energy towards the top. And the top is further from the ground, which you want and is for pest management, especially the SWD, the Asian fruit fly. And Paul Otten was a big fan of having your rows a little more narrow, more like 3 feet wide, so that you got lots of sun and air moving through those that mass of the bushes in order to keep the pest issues down, and other kinds of natural pest and disease control. Just the sun and air is really good.
Flowers, they're picking just to get rid of them, or are they actually being
Well,
sold either?
There is a big market for flowers, okay? And that could be fresh, frozen, or dried flowers. And I'm paying $25 a pound for dried flowers, and I can't get enough. I have a lot of breweries that use them. They can be used instead of hops. Most people will take the flowers, and you can do fresh, frozen, or dried flowers, make a syrup from them, and with the syrup, you can add that to ciders. You can do liqueurs with them. I St. Paul Leavenwell's Distillery does an elderflower liqueur with it. I've got breweries all across the country that want it, and I've got about a dozen small herbal infusion companies that make herbal infusions with the flowers, and some are in Wisconsin.
Tell us more about the co-op in terms of how it's structured, in terms of if I'm a grower with 10 plants, can I join? If I'm a grower with 1,000 acres, can I join? How do you balance?
Well, I do have everything spelled out on the membership page, but I'll just go over it briefly here. We have a 308B co-op. Dave Swanson's our attorney, Dorsey and Whitney. It's the best organized co-op out there. It's an open co-op. I work with growers if they're members or not. I've not been too hard-nosed or anxious or overly trying to get people to join because I want to make sure that it's going to work for them. Most of our members at this point are smaller producers who also make their own products, and so they are strictly a voting member. We also have a distribution rights level. These are for folks who want to, just grow commercially and have the co-op sell it and make ingredients through the co-op. I've got more growers interested in that, and as we get the technology together, that will be possible. We're looking at, for instance, putting in over 100 acres of production just west of the Twin Cities around the Montrose, Buffalo area. And that's in conjunction with a veterans farming initiative and some other neighboring farms. It's a nonprofit. They work with veterans, disabled veterans. And so we're planning to put disabled veterans and veterans to work in processing and producing elderberry and doing some basic ingredients. That's going to be part of that USDA planning grant study that I mentioned.
Got it. How about the hand harvest issue? Is this a sustainable option, or is there work to develop?
Well, the hand harvesting aspect of it is the lesser of the two big problems. The destemming is the biggest problem. I mean, those cymes, if you can get them in the sun, as Natasha said, with the full sun, you can actually snap off those cymes if they're evenly ripe. And that speeds that up. If some of them, part of the cyme, they're like 5 fingers, and the whole finger will be ripe, but maybe 2 of the 5 are ripe, and you got to come back later for the other 3 or something. And that's where you need the clippers or scissors or something like that. But that requires labor, but also like for the flowers requires labor. I had a big grower in Iowa that couldn't get me any flowers this year because of the labor issue. Probably COVID was a factor in that. But the destemming is the big thing, because right now we have batch destemming. We can do between 300 to 500 pounds an hour with a crew of about 3 or 4 people. And that would be pickers and destemmers, and that's the minimum you want to be looking at. A lot of times Natasha and I were doing it ourselves, and really it feels a lot better if you got 4 or 5 or 6 people
Yes.
out there.
Right.
And that is the bottleneck. The destemming is every single time. I mean, you could have 4 people, you can have 20 people. Actually, it's even worse if you have all those people out picking. The destemming is the bottleneck in the whole operation. And that's the thing. Thankfully, there's some really cool tinkerers and engineers out there working on it, because once somebody figures out how to make destemming go faster, I think it's gonna really revolutionize the harvesting.
A little bit here. You mentioned about aronia a few times. And the 2 berries have a close nutritive profile. Aronia is easier to grow. It's much harder to sell. And that's because of its bitterness. Elderberry is sweet neutral. It actually has a positive Brix, about half the sweetness of a grape. And that makes it much more desirable. It also has a longer cultural tradition and much higher demand. Although aronia is a great berry, we have a lot of people who have been growing aronia that are moving into elderberry, and either in whole and in part. I had a really good conversation with the largest aronia grower in Iowa a couple weeks back. So that's what I want to say about that. And I think in the future also, we're looking at the possibility of developing ingredients, blending things like black currants, aronia, and elderberry together. There's a lot of potential for those 3 perennial crops in marketing. The demand is there. The key is I worked for Pillsbury for 5 years, and 3 of those for international R&D, and particularly Haagen-Dazs International. So I'm used to working with the ingredients and stuff like that. And it's like anything else. You've got to put it in a form that your manufacturers want. I've got 12. I've been to national trade shows 4 or 5 years in a row. I've got over a dozen major brands that want to have elderberry flavors of some form or another. I just cannot promise the production for them to do product development.
Natasha, when's normal harvest time for you then? You said you're a little later than other, like Twin Cities, but.
Yeah. This year is later than normal. My berries right now are just starting to get purple. So like when I drive in the cities, there's not elderberry fields yet, right? Like you don't drive by elderberry fields, but all the different wild elderberries that I see on the roadsides, I'm about 2 to 3 weeks behind what I see in the cities.
So you'll be looking at harvest mid to late September then?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And the different cultivars ripen at different times. The ranch ripens a little earlier than the other ones. And like Chris said, even within, so each cultivar has it ripens at a little bit different time. And then even within that same cyme, the cyme is the clump of berries. There's these 5 fingers. And so if if you're being time efficient, you just harvest it and you lose some crop because you have unripe berries. If you're going for maximum harvest, you come through with the scissors and you cut each of those ones, just like strawberries or tomatoes, like they ripen in order, and you can watch the order. So you come through and grab that finger off, and then come back later and get the next one. So the good thing is, it's not a crop where you have to do it all in the same weekend. You can kind of space it out a little bit, which is good, because you have to get those people to come help you. And again, it's not the harvesting, it's once it's harvested, getting it ready for the freezer. That's the hard part. Now, I do have this to say: if a person's interested in growing elderberries and they're not looking to do it commercially or retail, my uncle laughed at me. Like, after the first year I was part of it and I was telling him all this work we did, my uncle just laughed at me, and he's like, because he's foraged for like decades, and he's like, this is what you do. He said, you have your chest freezers, and he said, you go harvest your elderberries and you stick them in a plastic bag, and you harvest the whole sign, you stick it in a plastic bag, throw it in the freezer, and then later on, when you have time, you take it out of the freezer and kind of like tap it a little, and the berries fall off the sign.
Okay. So the destemmer, is this where like every farmer could have a destemmer, or is it still pretty centralized where you're shipping the whole cyme to some processing plant?
So you can't, the cyme actually has to be processed on site, because that berry is perishable. And so that's the part that Chris is trying to develop, where there's hubs. It would be that growers in a certain area could pick, and then that very same day drive their harvest to the hub, where it gets destemmed and cleaned and rinsed and packed and thrown in a freezer.
Yep.
That's a part where it's, most people that are doing this don't want to invest. I don't know how much things cost. I know it costs a whole lot to set up a whole processing facility to do this on a major scale. There's a large cost involved in that. And so that's the reason for the hub. And that's why, like, on a smaller scale, if a person just wants to have an acre or a few, like on ours, we don't have all of the tools. Because again, my main thrust isn't fruit production, but we just go out and harvest and do it without the destemmer. We have to hand separate it and then get it rinsed and thrown in the freezer. So it's depending on what level a person wants to get involved. I think if somebody was like all in and they're like, hey, I want 1,000 acres, then at that point, yeah, get yourself the freezer and get yourself all the supplies so that you can do it. And I think that the industry is going to go that way. But in the meantime, it's kind of the hubs is what's in development.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like almost sounds like an exact parallel track as the hazelnut world right now in the Midwest, where we've got a lot of small growers doing everything by hand. And then we finally just got our processing incubator facility built. So now people can bring all their hazelnuts to get sized and cracked and cleaned and everything. So boy, it'd be great to have something like that happening in Wisconsin, an elderberry processing hub.
I would love that.
Yeah, right.
Because you need that infrastructure, or else, like I said, you're really just begging. Like by the end of the season, nobody wants to answer my phone because they know, like, when I was when I was focusing on berry production, they're like, oh no, I know what she's doing. She's calling because she wants me to come harvest.
Don't answer the phone.
Right.
Jason, just for a second, wondering about the juice market. I know I read a little bit about the elderberry juice market. Is that an avenue that more growers are looking at? Do you have to spend as much time destemming if you're juicing them right away, or how does that fit into the marketing process?
So what I first do is I take those frozen berries that are like, ripe berries, like as much as I can get them to be just ripe berries. It's just ripe berries in that bucket. And I take them out. And what happens is when they thaw, a lot of the juice comes out on its own. So I put them in a colander and the juice comes out on its own. And that is raw elderberry juice. So there's a market for that. And most of the time consumers don't, like, if I'm directly selling to people, they don't want raw elderberry juice. They want me to have made it into syrup, or I call it a tonic, because people get really confused when you say syrup. They're like, yes, there's a lot of education. So if you're in the crunchy mama circle, they know exactly what you're saying when you say elderberry syrup. But in the general population, they're like, wow,
pancakes?
That's really expensive. They want to put it on their pancakes. And they're like, I'm not going to spend all that money to put on my pancakes. And I'm like, you better not put it on your pancakes, because you're really going to offend me if you take all my work and throw it on a pancake.
I've had it on my pancakes, so I don't know.
Oh, I'm sure it's yummy, but it's just like, It's so expensive. You'd have to like really be indulging yourself.
Yeah.
I
To
make
be
really
pouring.
good pancakes, so.
Well, there you go. Yeah, so you make yourself some really good buckwheat, and it'd be like a great meal. So in the industry that Chris is dealing with, they want raw juice because they're going to process it, because most people, there's a concern out there that raw elderberry juice can have some glucosides in it, and it can upset people's stomach. And I take it, I'll drink it raw just because I don't want to heat it and break down enzymes. But I know for it to be sold, or when I'm going to sell it to people, I'll have heat treated it, because in making it into the syrup or the tonic, like I call it. So you take your berries out of the freezer, you let that raw juice come out. So you get a certain percentage of juice, a large percentage of the juice comes out just from being frozen and the cell wall is breaking. So that you've got that juice. Then I take my berries that are left over after that juice has come out, and I put them in a steam juicer. And basically what a steam juicer is, it's from Europe. Steam rises up and falls, it hits the lid and falls down and pulls the rest of that juice out. And so then that's the secondary juice. But either way, whether it's the steam juice, if I use the steam juicer, then that juice is already warm, and I bring the temperature down to the point that I can add honey without denaturing the good enzymes in the honey. And for the raw juice, I heat it up. Same thing. I heat it up, get it to that point where it's denatured the enzymes in the elderberry, because then that's going to break down the glucosides. And then let it cool, add the honey, and then I add in ginger and cinnamon. I'm blanking out right now. Ginger and cinnamon basically are the two things, and let it simmer for a while, and then strain out those things. And that resulting product, so it's the elderberry juice, honey, ginger, and cinnamon. That's what people call elderberry syrup, or like I call it elderberry tonic, so that people don't pour it on their pancakes.
Yeah.
And that's what people like when I sell directly to people, or I give it to my friends and family. That's the product that people want is the elderberry syrup.
Got it. So Chris mentioned that a lot of the co-op members can sell products on their own too. Do you get a sense where maybe the industry might go, where we have, I sort of think of the cheese world, right? You could have some really big consolidated cheese businesses, or you can have all these farmstead creameries scattered across the countryside and have 1,000 different kinds of cheese. You think it's going to be both, or some of that, or where do you think the industry will go here?
I think it's going to be both of that, plus a middle ground where there's not enough growers yet. What I love about the way that Chris set the co-op up is like some co-ops are set up that you have to contract with the co-op. You're not allowed to sell off by yourself. Right. Like you are beholden to the co-op. And that is not the business model or the model that Chris wanted to do at all. In fact, he encourages people to direct sell. He just says, hey, can you commit can you commit a certain a number of what you got, so we know how much the co-op is getting. But I think that it will be just kind of like what you said with the dairy, where there will be these people who have, moving, not now, but in the future, there'll be large growers who are doing it wholesale, very mechanized. They've got a lot of money into their infrastructure because they're doing it on a large volume. And then there'll be the growers that, they have, I don't know if hobby is the right word, because it's a business and it's a lot of work, and there is profit to be made if you put the work in. But there'll be people who do this on a local level.
Yeah, right. What's the grower community like? Is there besides the co-op, is there an association, or, particularly in Wisconsin, what does the scene look like right now?
The co-op is really Chris mentioned that the website kind of is, because there's become such an interest, it's kind of broken into growing and health and then the berry and flower side. So really we're such a small community right now. Basically Chris is the hub. Like if people have questions, they go to Chris, and Chris funnels them over on depending on what their question is. So I think as the industry grows, there will probably end up being like chats and that type of thing. But the industry is small right now. And so the co-op has been essential for that kind of communication and relationship.
Yeah, got it. Here's a question for you that's super hard to answer, I know, but I'd like to ask it. So, so many of these new crops, hazelnuts, aronia, currants, elderberry, you name it, it's all about trying to expand the palate of the American consumer. Eats, for example, Up in Bayfield, we try to get folks to eat currants, but when they go to a pick your own farm, you can pick blueberries or you can pick currants. Which one do you want? Well, they all choose
Americans,
blueberries.
blueberries.
Yeah, yeah. So what have you found that's been working in sort of your marketing messaging, and what are consumers responding to about these new crops, particularly elderberry, that they really like?
So I actually haven't had, I mean, in earlier years, I would educate people. I mean, well, if I ran into a Russian or Eastern European, they were just like so excited. And it actually was amazing. Like at Natura, there's black currants and there's elderberries. And when those come ripe, the Russians joke that they have the Russian telegraph. Like as soon as things are ripe, the entire community is there because they love them and it's a part of the culture. And it's not for Americans. Most Americans, like Carl said, they'll say, "Oh, my mom made elderberry jam." And elderberry pies. I don't have to, because of the work that Chris has done and Terry's done, I don't really have to educate people anymore because right now the demand is greater than the supply. Because of, I think elderberries they do have a good flavor, but their main thing is the health benefits. And I was in the Valley Natural Foods Co-op the other day, and I was shocked because they had kind of like a COVID end cap. And the elderberry products probably consisted of 30% of, that echinacea and vitamin C, and there was elderberries taking up 30% of it. So I think the American market has caught on that elderberries are very healthy for you.
Well,
it's
we've
good
got
for their bodies.
These treasures, these wild native plants growing in our backyard that we've just ignored.
Yeah.
Our best example of what we can do would be cranberries, right? We took those out of the wild and turned them into a healthy crop. So, all right.
Yeah, and they've really helped. Cranberries have really helped Wisconsin. I can't remember where they are in the ranking, but it's really helped Wisconsin's economy.
Absolutely.
No doubt.
Well, maybe we should wrap it up. We're a little after 11. Carl, do you have any last questions?
No, I just want to say thanks, Natasha. It was interesting. I learned a little bit more about elderberries, and I won't pour them on my pancakes anymore. Syrup.
Well, thanks, guys.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Brought to you by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension.